Good morning, world changers. I hope you're all well. It is Tuesday morning, it is day 2, and I am joined again by the wonderful Rabbi Steve Leader. Obviously, we're talking this week about, well, it's Transformation Month, and we're looking at the subject of pain and suffering and how that can make us more beautiful than before and how suffering can transform us. And obviously, we're focusing on Steve's book, which is More Beautiful Than Before, which I highly recommend. Now, yesterday, Steve, we heard your story, your very personal story about your journey of pain and suffering and what that taught you. But I want to today just focus on what the purpose of pain is. And I just want to invite you to read the opening paragraph from your book, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, I'd be happy to. You know, it seems particularly apt during this pandemic. Really, it's shockingly apt, actually. Every one of us, sooner or later, walks through hell. The hell of being hurt, the hell of hurting another, the hell of cancer, the hell of a reluctant, thunking shovelful of earth upon the casket of someone we deeply loved, the hell of divorce, of a kid in trouble, of Alzheimer's, of addiction, of stress, of aging, of knowing that this year, like any year, may be our last. We all walk through hell. The point is not to come out empty-handed. The point is to make your life worthy of your suffering.
It's such a powerful statement. And I remember when I picked up your book, when I interviewed you, which I thought was several years ago, which shows how much I've packed in a few years.
Yeah.
But because I was coming through the other side of my challenges, it's suddenly that paragraph just made me understand what that suffering had been for. It made me realize that it was leading me somewhere. It was redirecting me. I didn't know where, but I knew it had all been for something.
Yes, yes.
Is that the ultimate reason that we suffer, that we have pain? Is it always to redirect us somewhere for a more meaningful life?
Well, look, I'm not sure there's a reason for suffering. In fact, one of the things that makes suffering suffering is that it seems often capricious or random. The question is, what is our response? If our response to our suffering is something that imbues our lives with meaning, then the suffering transforms into something other than suffering, or other than mere suffering. And I think that's the goal. You know, suffering and pain are suffering and pain, no matter how you cut it. But what is the end result of that suffering and that pain? Is it something that adds more meaning to your life? Is it something that adds more beauty to your life? Is it something that changes your life in a way that makes you worthy of what you've been through? You know, this was a quote from Dostoevsky. He said his greatest fear was that his life would not be worthy of his suffering. I think that is an incredibly powerful and profound idea. Can you make your life worthy of the suffering that you have endured? Or is it all for naught? Because that's the control human beings have in the midst of suffering. We often can't control whether suffering comes to us or not. I couldn't control the fact that another car ran a red light and veered into mine. I can control how I allow that pain and suffering to inform my future. Can't undo the past, but I can use the past to inform my future. And this is also what Viktor Frankl talked about in Man's Search for Meaning. That word, meaning, in the title is exactly, I think, what Dostoevsky was talking about and what I'm talking about. That when suffering creates meaning in your life, it ceases to be mere suffering. And that's what happened for you. That's what happened for me. I never would have written this book without what happened to me. I never would be the more empathic, better listener, better human being, and better rabbi that I am if this hadn't happened to me. I don't think I'd be the husband I am. I don't think I'd be the father I am. I don't think I'd be the son that I am. So again, I think the tricky part of all of this, Suzy, is that finding meaning within suffering should not be confused with the idealization of suffering.
Yeah.
Right? I am in no way saying to people that the suffering we endure is worth the change or the lessons it leads us to. I am simply saying we shouldn't allow it to be worth less. That's the point.
Yeah, that's quite a different distinction to make. I mean, that is the challenge with pain or suffering of any kind, because I know if I hadn't had the right role models around me or the right support, I would have spiraled downwards, and I would have continued. I mean, I did spiral downwards, but I would have continued down that, and who knows where that would have led me. I mean, this is the challenge that we have. If people don't have the right support, sometimes they don't come out more beautiful than before, and the
Yes.
suffering and the pain, it's not worthless, but it goes down a very different route. It doesn't create
Yes.
the beautiful life that we're talking about.
And I would say more common than people not having support available to them, which I agree with you happens. But far more common are the situations where people do have support available to them, but they lack the humility or the strength or the capacity to reach out. There's this saying in the Talmud which says, the prisoner cannot free himself. Think about that for a moment. The prisoner cannot free himself. When I assure you, no one, absolutely no human being endures suffering better alone. Because the worst part of suffering is the sense of isolation, is the feeling of being abandoned, is the feeling of being in that suffering totally alone. Is there anything really more frightening than being in the midst of suffering completely and entirely alone? So more often than not, having external resources available is the commonality of not having the maturity, the wisdom, the strength, and the humility to reach out for that help, to say to people who care about you, I'm in trouble, I need you, please help me. Or to say to a professional, to reach out to a mental health professional and to say, I'm in danger of spiraling downward. I need help. That, please help me, are three of the most important words any human being can utter. And you will be pleasantly surprised in most cases by the degree to which other people will respond to that plea with kindness and sincerity and love and generosity. Most people really do want to help. Will you be disappointed by some people? Yes, you will be disappointed by some people. The way I like to think about this, and the way I try to help other people think about this idea of reaching out, but what if I'm disappointed? I put it in a way that's sort of glib, but easy to remember, and I think also very true, which is when you reach out for help, the people who really matter, they don't mind. And the people who mind, they don't matter.
Yeah, it's so true. It's
One
so
of the
true.
good things about pain, it strips away a lot of nonsense from our lives.
Yeah.
Aren't we seeing that with the COVID-19 crisis, right? It's stripping away a lot of nonsense. And some very, very beautiful things are emerging in the vacuum.
Yeah, we're getting real clarity about what's important. And it is that thing that it seems like a societal thing. I don't know if it's societal, but I know when I was reaching out for help, I felt like the biggest failure ever. I felt ashamed. And yet it took enormous courage to actually say. And it's like, well,
Yes.
why do we see it as a strength in other people, but a weakness in ourselves? It is just the bizarrest contradiction.
Yes, what you're saying is it reminds me of a very beautiful story that apparently it's attributed to Carl Jung, the great psychologist Carl Jung, who was asked by one of his students why in ancient times did people see the face of God, but today no one sees the face of God? And Jung's answer apparently was because today no one is great enough to stoop low.
Oh.
No one is great enough to stoop low.
Yeah.
Humility requires real greatness and real strength.
Yeah.
So, that's another way of thinking about what it means to reach out. It is a sign of great maturity and strength.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, vulnerability as well. That's another one. I mean, you said in your book, if you're visited by pain, examine your life, examine your conduct. So explain a bit more about what you mean by that.
Well, let's start with what I don't mean.
Okay.
And again, this is a quote from the Talmud, which says, if you are visited by pain, examine your life. It is not a statement intended to blame the victim. In other words, it's not a statement that supposes that you deserve the pain that you are in. Now, look, sometimes
it could be read like that. It could be interpreted.
And sometimes that's the case. If you smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day and you get lung cancer, you probably should examine your life, right? and it is your fault. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
However, we all know that terrible things happen to completely innocent people. So it's not, I believe, the rabbi saying, examine your life as in you are the cause of your own pain. I think it's much more, examine your life because this pain that you've been visited by is presenting you with an opportunity to change your life. Pain is an invitation to change. And frankly, for most of us, it's the only invitation to change that has any deep and profound effect on us. Success is not really an invitation to change. Success is an invitation to keep doing the same thing again and again and again. Only pain, which is so disruptive, only pain is, I would say, more than an invitation. It is an imperative to change your life.
Yeah, because you say that, comfort dulls our edge and pain sharpens our perspective. I mean, is that, I know I get what you mean about success, but I mean, will we ever evolve to a point where we can learn through another way other than pain? Or is that the ultimate purpose of pain? That is there to be so painful that it gets our attention?
I wish I was more optimistic about human nature, and I could say to you, I think success will change our behavior. I think that,
No.
I think experience changes our behavior. No, we learn from pain. We learn from mistakes. Any leader will tell you that he or she has learned far more, exponentially more, from his or her mistakes than his or her, good decisions. So fortunately, there are a lot of painful lessons we only have to learn once. That's kind of the good news about pain. But no, to be honest, it breaks my heart that a gray spot on our MRI in the oncologist's office is one of the few things that gets our attention anymore. It breaks my heart that it takes a global pandemic to get us to hit the pause button on so many things that were such a terrible waste of time and such excessive habits that we all had. It breaks my heart that it took this terrible physical pain to make me a better rabbi, a more empathic human being. I wish there were another way, Suzy, but I don't see it. And there's a reason this book has been translated into Chinese and into Korean, and that it's been out for 2.5 years, but it's still a bestseller in a lot of categories. There's a reason. I'd like to think it's because of the quality of the writing and the thinking, which hopefully partially it is.
Of course.
But it's also because it is the existential question that chases after every human being, which is, how do I make something of this painful existence that I sometimes have to endure? By the way, I'm not sure we would enjoy life very much without pain. That's also a part of it.
So we need the yin and yang, the opposite, to really
Yes.
appreciate the joy in life.
And if you think about it, most beautiful things are born of pain, including human beings.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't gone through it. I've witnessed it twice. Childbirth didn't look like a lot of fun to me.
Totally.
You know, um, even with the epidural, there's a lot of blood and screaming involved, and for me, that's both very real and also metaphorically very important. I can't think of many beautiful things that are not somehow, if you trace them back far enough, rooted in pain. Sometimes when I'm teaching this topic, I'll ask people in the crowd to share the most beautiful, important things or people in their lives. And then I ask them to trace the root of that blessing, both R-O-O-T and R-O-U-T-E.
Mm-hmm.
What are the roots of that blessing? Let's take, for example, I would say that my marriage is one for me. Well, I fell in love with my wife partly because I met her in the aftermath of a horrendous and painful destruction in a previous relationship. Had I not gone through that, I never would have recognized Betsy for who and what she is, right? Yeah. Childbirth, we already talked about. Even death, which is so painful, at one and the same time reveals the beauty and the power of life. My next book, which will be out in January, I just learned, is called The Beauty of What Remains. And it's about what death teaches us, the ultimate pain and fear, of course. What does that teach us about the power and beauty of life? And the fact is, it teaches us everything about the power and beauty of life. Yeah. Kafka said the meaning of life is that it ends. And that's so true.
But yet we become so complacent. We know the only certainty in life is that we are going to die. It's like we literally.
Well, I'm not sure we're so complacent. I think it's much more that it's locked in the basement of our psyche, kind of pounding on the ceiling of the basement with a broomstick at all times. I think that death actually animates all of our lives, but in ways that we often, repress. But the larger point is that every beautiful thing I can think of is born somehow or rooted somehow in pain.
Yeah, that's true. And just going back to what you said earlier about being isolated in pain, I mean, what COVID-19 has taught us, we are all globally going through it. I mean, we're all going through it. We're having different experiences, but everybody at some point or will have pain in their life, but that has been a very individual journey. This, for the first time ever, feels like the whole world is collectively in pain on some level.
And it is to the point that no one suffers better alone. And on a more micro level, but still a significant order of magnitude, this is what grief support groups are all about. This is what AA is all about. This is what your change yourself changes everything. This is what Change Your World is all about. Yeah. It's about a collective shared journey, including very painful journeys. So it's to the point that no one suffers better alone. When I visit people in the hospital, no matter what the medical problem might be, the thing that I always notice is the cards taped up on the wall of the hospital room, the flower arrangements on the windowsill or the tray, the cell phone texts coming in. These are very healing and very important components in addressing pain. Piercing the isolation of pain is very much the right and most important first thing to do.
In terms of, I mean, you've also said in your book about pain being a real driver for change. You know, like that it's a teacher, it's looking at us to examine our life. And you said pain inspires us to change the world, change our communities, our families, or maybe just one life, or even our own life. But what do you think that driving force is? Is it that we don't want other people to experience that pain? And if that is the case, that's why we're driven to make changes. Are we denying that person the opportunity for their own growth, for their own journey?
Well, I think what I would answer that by saying changing ourselves is the first step to changing anyone or anything else outside of ourselves. Trying to reverse engineer change, I think, is a road to failure. Trying to change the world without changing yourself, I think, is just a road to nowhere. Are we, by making other people's lives better, are we depriving them of the opportunity to learn from pain? I don't think so, because pain is inevitable in every life, no matter how secure, how wealthy, how privileged, how protected. Pain is an inevitable part of the human journey. So I don't think that being kind to others or diminishing the pain of another human being is in any way shortchanging them on an important life lesson, because I assure you that life lesson is coming, no matter what. Now, let's say we feed the hungry. Yeah, we're protecting them from the pain of hunger, but we're not protecting them from the pain of a broken heart, or the pain of the death of a loved one, or the pain of some capricious, car accident, which is what happened to me. So I wouldn't worry, and I don't think that it's wise to avoid making other people's lives better so that they can learn something from pain. However, I think when it comes to parenting, that's a different matter. I have a friend named Wendy Mogul who wrote a great book called The Blessing of a Skinned Knee. And to make her thesis pretty short and simple, we don't do our children any favor by making life too easy for them. Because if we make life too easy for them, they end up being hothouse flowers, and when they go out into the real world, they just wither. So the one exception to what we've just been discussing, I would say, is as a parent, I do think that if you protect your child from too much pain, you're actually doing your child a disservice.
Yeah, but it's equipping them, isn't it? It's being that support, and that's essentially what we're doing here at Change Your World every day. And that's what was there for me. I had an enormous amount of support around me. I can never thank the people that supported me, so all I can do is pay it forward, and that's the meaning that I've taken from my pain and suffering. So
that's right.
Yeah. So hopefully
you are a living example of my book's imperative, which is not to come out of hell empty-handed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it there. Tomorrow we'll be back again with day 3, and we'll be looking at ways to survive the pain that we're suffering. And we'll be back at 8 a.m. tomorrow.
And a happy birthday to your partner Dave, and to my son Aaron. So happy birthday to Dave and Aaron today.
Well remembered. Thank you. Yes. Happy birthday, Dave. Love you.
All right. Thank you, Suzy.
Thanks.
See you tomorrow.
Thanks, Steve. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.